You were never supposed to hear this. There are records locked away in basements of old New England churches that, if made public, would collapse the town councils that still protect a lie. What I'm about to tell you was never printed in a newspaper, never included in any genealogy. It was erased intentionally because it doesn't fit into what they want you to believe about your world, your body, or your God. In the winter of 1847, a man emerged from a storm that had already killed 17 people. But he wasn't frostbitten. His eyes were pale and inhuman. His words, carefully chosen. His presence, disruptive, not violent, not loud, but like gravity bending the world around him. His name was Samuel Hawthorne. That's what he told them. But that's not who he was. And if you keep listening, I'm going to tell you what he really was. The town of Millbrook was dying, trapped by snow, cut off from trade, with children coughing themselves to death and mothers whispering about omens in the firelight. The local doctor, a Harvard man disgraced for gambling, was running out of medicine. He wrote in his journal that even whiskey froze solid. People were starting to lose faith not just in survival, but in each other. Then Hawthorne arrived. He walked out a wide-out blizzard like it was a Sunday stroll. His coat repelled snow like oil. His boots left tracks with geometric patterns no one recognized. A boy spotted him first, then called his father. Half the men in town watched from behind frostbitten windows as a stranger approached the heart of their world, untouched by the storm that had already buried others in their sleep. He should have been dead, but he wasn't even cold. That night, he warmed his hands at the Millbrook Inn's fire. A girl began coughing Sarah Thornberry, just 12 years old. Everyone had heard it worsening for weeks. Dr. Putnam feared consumption, but Hawthorne didn't even flinch. He reached into a satchel made from some strange animal hide, pulled out a dark vial, and told her to take 3 drops. By morning, she was healed. That's when the town began to shift. No one said it aloud, but you could feel it. This man didn't just save lives. He changed the temperature of belief. And belief, once rewired, is the first stage of control. He wasn't a healer. He was a replacement. And replacements don't leave. They asked him where he came from. He smiled like the question didn't matter. He said, "Beyond the white fields, where the old ways still guide the wise." When pressed, he'd speak in riddles of valleys where the sun moved differently, where seasons didn't obey time. He never said a country, never named a people, just my people. And when he said it, something shifted behind his eyes, like remembering a place he wasn't supposed to speak of. To the children, he was fascinating. To the adults, he was wrong in ways they couldn't explain. You know that feeling when a predator locks eyes with you not in hunger, but in curiosity? That was the way Hawthorne looked at people, measured them, cataloged them, memorized them. One woman, Grace Thornberry, began writing letters to her sister about him. They were never mailed. Her husband, Thomas, didn't like it, but she wrote them anyway. We have those letters now, preserved in the Thornberry family archive, and they tell a story different from the town's official memory. Grace wrote that Hawthorne never truly slept, maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time, if that. Most nights, she found him sitting by the window, staring at the snow like he was listening for something. And during the worst storms, when no sane man would leave his home, Hawthorne would vanish into the forest. Hours later, he'd return with things no one else could find: fresh meat, medicinal roots buried under 3 feet of ice, and strange artifacts wrapped in cloth. His satchel never left his side. That bag, that cursed thing, was where the town's nightmare began. He called it his medicine kit, but it held more than vials and powders. Inside were tools no one recognized. Metal implements too sharp, too exact, etched with symbols that glowed faintly when held near fire. One night, when Grace passed him sleeping, she swore she saw the bag moving, shifting as if something inside were breathing. Dr. Putnam tried to study the tools. Hawthorne let him, but only briefly, and only under his supervision. The doctor would later write that several of the items resembled surgical tools, but others defied classification entirely. They didn't know it yet, but Millbrook wasn't being healed. It was being prepared. Conditioned. You've heard of slow poisoning: arsenic, mercury, lead in the water. But what if someone could poison belief itself? What if a man could enter your town, fix your wounds, feed your children, and in return claim your mind? That's what Samuel Hawthorne did. And the worst part? He made them ask for it. It started small. A cut that healed overnight. A fever broken with a single drop of bitter oil. A newborn with a failing pulse revived with nothing more than touch and breath. Samuel Hawthorne never boasted. He didn't need to. The town talked for him. But here's the thing about miracles. The first one buys trust. The second builds faith. The third, that's when people stop asking questions. Dr. Putnam, educated, rational, a man of science, began to defer to Hawthorne more and more. Not publicly. Not yet. But in private. He confessed in his journal that the stranger knew things. Not just about medicine, but about anatomy, herbs, pressure points, even bone growth and blood rhythms. He wrote, "There are pulses he listens to that I cannot feel, and when he places his hand on a man's chest, it's as if he's reading something beneath the skin." Putnam wasn't the only one falling under the spell. Farmers brought him sick animals. Mothers brought him their infants. Men brought him their secrets. And slowly, without any announcement or declaration, Hawthorne became the town's second physician, second priest, and silent ruler. He never asked for power. He didn't have to. They gave it to him. And then came the meat. Hawthorne never ate with the others. He cooked alone. His stew pots emitted a smell they couldn't place: earthy, metallic, sweet. Mrs. Foresque, who ran the inn, said it reminded her of blood and roses. But when she asked about the recipe, he only smiled and said, "My people prepare food the old way, with reverence." The hunters were the first to notice something was off. He claimed his meat came from deer, elk, snow hare. But the bones were wrong, the tendons too long, the texture unfamiliar. Some cuts looked eerily like human muscle. But no one wanted to say it aloud, because by then, nearly every household had taken his medicine. They owed him. That's how control works. First, give them relief. Then, give them something they fear losing. The townspeople didn't just admire Hawthorne. They depended on him. And dependence is a leash. Grace Thornberry wrote, "The more he helps us, the more he owns us. We speak of him like a prophet. But I think he is something older than prophecy. Something that remembers before men wrote language." She wasn't wrong. Because what Samuel Hawthorne brought with him wasn't just survival. It was transformation. And it had already begun. They say every town has a threshold, a line between what it believes and what it fears. Millbrook crossed that line in March of 1847. It happened after the third child disappeared. The first was chalked up to wolves. The second, a tragic accident, maybe thin ice on the river. But the third, that was different. Little Mary Wren, only 6 years old, vanished from inside her home while her mother was preparing supper. No broken window, no forced door, just a cold breeze, a single trail of damp footprints leading away from the hearth, and a half-eaten piece of bread on the floor. That's when the rumors started. Not spoken during the day. No, only whispered late at night. About eyes in the woods. About strange shapes walking upright along the ridgeline. And about a man who always seemed to know where people were and where they'd be. Hawthorne had an answer for everything. "The child wandered," he said calmly. "These things happened during long winters." But his voice didn't carry sorrow. It carried finality. And no one questioned him. Not out loud. Because by then, every family had at least one person still alive because of him. Even Dr. Putnam was losing himself. His journal entries grew fragmented. He started describing dreams, visions of ancient cities made of bone, of stars that pulse with intention, of tall figures standing in snowdrifts, whispering in languages he couldn't replicate when he woke. He once wrote, "He is not curing us. He is tempering us." And Grace Thornberry, she kept watching. She saw things others missed. Like how Hawthorne never walked anywhere randomly. He moved through the town as if following a pattern. He'd pause near certain houses, run his fingers along doorframes, linger near the well for exactly 11 seconds. It was always 11. Always. She followed him once, during one of his midnight excursions. She wrapped herself in a cloak, waited until the wind covered her tracks, and kept her distance. He walked north, toward the tree line, into the part of the forest that even hunters avoided. That's where she saw it. A clearing, wide and perfect. No snow touched the center, though it blanketed everything else for miles. In the middle stood a structure like a stone pillar, carved with those same symbols from his tools. The pillar was warm. She could see the steam rising off it. And Hawthorne? He knelt before it, not in prayer, in communion. That night, Grace didn't sleep. The next morning, she found a sprig of pine on her pillow. Nothing else. No footprints. No wind. Just the pine. And that was when she knew. Hawthorne wasn't here to save them. He was here to prepare the offering. By April, Millbrook no longer belonged to its people. Not officially. Of course, the town still had a preacher, a doctor, a general store. But the rhythms had changed. The way people spoke. The way they looked at the mountains. The way they looked at each other. It was as if the town had adopted a second heartbeat, and it was beating to Samuel Hawthorne. Even Reverend Greenfield had changed. He had once thundered about salvation, about sin and eternal fire. But now, his sermons were quieter. He started quoting strange passages, verses no one remembered from Scripture. Words like the blessed silence and the watcher in the deep ice. When asked, he said they were from lost books. Older than Rome. Older than Genesis, he claimed. And people nodded, because by now they want to believe. That's the part no one talks about, how easy it is to let the devil in, as long as he cures your child and teaches you to hunt in the dark. One by one, the doubters began to vanish. Thomas Thornberry confronted Hawthorne after finding claw marks on the barn. He was found 3 days later in the river, his face frozen in a look of rapture, not terror. His wife, Grace, never spoke about it, but she stopped writing, stopped smiling, and began attending those quiet meetings at the church, the ones no one talked about. They stopped ringing the bell. The townspeople started gathering at odd hours, sometimes in the woods, sometimes near the pillar Grace had found, which they now called the Stepping Stone. Dr. Putnam, once the town's most rational man, began marking people, a small cut on the back of the hand, sealed with a mixture of Hawthorne's herbs. To protect the blood, he explained. No one objected. The children sang new songs, not nursery rhymes. Litanies. They sang about the one who walked before the storm, and the cold mouth that never closes. One boy, young Eli Tanners, carved a symbol into his own skin, said Hawthorne had shown him how. And Hawthorne, he was never cruel, never angry, just present, watching, teaching, guiding. He said, to survive the new winter, you must become older than the first spring. Most didn't understand what he meant, but they nodded anyway, because Hawthorne had given them something stronger than hope. He'd given them belonging, and once a man belongs, he'll do anything protected, even if it means forgetting who he was, or worse, remembering who he used to be. Now I'm going to ask you something that most won't understand. Comment this phrase twice below. The snow remembers what the mind forgets. Because if you've made it this far, you've already crossed your own line. And I need to know you're still with me. There's a moment in every possession, spiritual, psychological, cultural, when the host stops resisting. Not because they're broken, but because they finally believe the thing inside them belongs there. Millbrook hit that moment in early May of 1847. The thaw came late that year. The river should have broken open with the first warm rains, but they didn't. The ice held like it had a will of its own. Birds didn't return. No insects hummed. And beneath the frozen crust of the forest, something began to move. They heard it at night. Low groans, not quite human. Rhythms that pulsed through the earth like drums beneath a floorboard. That's when the dream spread. Not just to Dr. Putnam. Not just to the children. To everyone. Shared dreams. Whole households would wake at the same hour, gasping for air, their mouths filled with the taste of copper and pine. They all described the same thing, a wide white field, stretching forever, with figures standing at the edge, tall, wrapped in cloaks, watching. Hawthorne said they were the ancients. My kin, he called them, not of blood, but pattern. When asked what that meant, he said, the ones who came before language, the ones who sang to ice. Reverend Greenfield declared it a blessing. He said they were being chosen, prepared for something larger than the American experiment, larger than God. He started burning the old church books, not just sermons and records, but Bibles too. He called it the shedding of false skin. They didn't object. No one did, because the town was different now. Quieter, focused. Men who used to argue politics over whiskey now sat in silence, tracing shapes into their tabletops. Women who once feared childbirth now welcomed it, even when the pregnancies came with unnatural speed and unnatural strength. One woman, Martha Hale, delivered a child after only 4 months. It came out silent, wide-eyed, pale, but strong, and Hawthorne took in his arms like he had been waiting for it. He whispered something into its ear, and it blinked slowly like it understood. That night, all the lanterns in town went out at once. Not from wind, not from lack of oil. They just extinguished, and no one relit them, because darkness now was familiar. Dr. Putnam wrote only one sentence that week. He is not bringing the cold. He is reminding it where we are. And still no one left, because the town had passed the threshold. And once you belong to something ancient, you forget how to run. You want to believe you'd be different, that if you lived in Millbrook, you'd see through the charm, the rituals, the slow bleed of the soul. But belief doesn't disappear all at once. It rots, quietly, from the inside. By June, the rot had reached every corner of the town. Mail stopped leaving. Roads remained closed even though the thaw had begun. The excuse was always the same. Too dangerous. Landslides. Bandits. Wolves. But the truth was, no one tried to leave anymore. They didn't want to. They were building something. At the center of town, beside the modest white church where Reverend Greenfield used to speak of Christ and sin, a new structure was rising. No one called it a temple. No one had to. They built it with stone pulled from the earth black, veined, slick with moisture even after days in the sun. Hawthorne said it was living stone, and the men repeated it like gospel. Each slab was carved by hand, not with tools, but with fingers. Their nails split, their skin tore, but they didn't stop, not even when the blood soaked the ground. Hawthorne told them pain was the price of accuracy, that the shapes they carved had to be exact. Geometry is how they listen, he said. The ones no one questioned. The ones seen only in dreams and flickers at the edge of the woods. One night, during construction, a boy was crushed by falling stone. The townspeople didn't cry. They laid his body in the center of the unfinished floor, circled him, and waited. Hawthorne stepped into the ring, knelt, and whispered something ancient. The child didn't move, but the stone did. It shifted just slightly, enough that Grace Thornberry vomited at the sight of it. The next morning, the child's body was gone, and the foundation of the new building was 1 stone taller. They called it the Listening House. But Grace, who still kept her silence, wrote one more note to herself slipped beneath a floorboard where it would survive the generations. This is not our town anymore. This is not our time. He brought something older than language, and we like fools offered our children in exchange for windowless nights. Hawthorne never raised his voice, never forced a single soul. He didn't need to. When people believe they're chosen, they'll give you everything, even their future. On the longest day of the year, the sun rose over Millbrook, but no bird sang. The forest was silent. The river didn't run. The wind, which had howled all winter, now refused to blow. Everything stood still, as if the world was holding its breath. That's when the final change began. Hawthorne gathered them not with commands, but with invitation. One by one, families stepped from their homes and followed him into the woods. No questions, no hesitation. Children in their mother's arms, old men limping behind the young, women carrying bowls of herbs and sharpened bone. They walked past the edge of what had once been safe, past the hunting paths, past the burial stones, into the white field. It shouldn't have been there. The snow had long since melted everywhere else. But the field was untouched, preserving cold like a memory that refused to die. At its center stood the stone pillar Grace had seen. But now it had grown. Taller, thicker, covered entirely in spiraling carvings that seemed to move when looked at directly. Hawthorne didn't speak. He raised one hand, and the townspeople formed a circle. Reverend Greenfield stepped forward and recited something not in Latin, not in English, but in a tongue that vibrated in the teeth. The children began to hum. And that's when the earth opened, not violently, quietly, like a door unlocking. A wide, circular opening formed at the base of the pillar, leading downward into coal black stone. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a throat, and from it came a sound no human should ever hear. Not a roar. A chorus. Thousands of voices, all speaking at once. Layered, familiar, terrifying. It said one word in 1,000 tongues. Welcome. Dr. Putnam stepped forward first. No hesitation. He removed his coat, folded it neatly, and walked into the dark. Others followed. Some wept. Some smiled. Most were silent. Grace did not go. She stood outside the circle, clutching her son, the youngest. William, she whispered to him over and over, you are not one of them. You are not chosen. Hawthorne looked at her, not with anger, with disappointment. Then he turned away and entered the earth with the others. The stone closed behind them. The white field vanished by morning, covered in fresh grass. No trace of blood, no footprints, just silence. Millbrook was gone. But some say when the snow returns early, when the air smells of pine and copper, the listening house hums beneath the soil, waiting for its next winter. The state record shows that Millbrook's postmaster filed his last letter in June of 1847. After that, nothing. No mail, no census, no tax rolls. By fall, surveyors sent to the region found nothing but overgrown roads and a few burned-out cabins. They reported the town as dissolved due to harsh winter and abandonment. But the state never asked why the crops in surrounding counties turned white that season. Not frost. White, as if the soil had been bleached from underneath. And no one explained the dead zone, a 3-mile stretch where compasses spun, and animals refused to cross. Most people forgot Millbrook, but not everyone. In 1912, a group of folklore scholars from Ohio State tried to find it. They were looking for what they called patterned absences, places where communities had vanished and stories didn't line up. They called Millbrook a statistical phantom. It had been recorded in 3 official maps and erased from 2 of them. They hiked north from Elkhorn, crossed into the old logging roads, and after 5 days in the forest, they found something. A clearing, circular, still, quiet, no insects, no birds, just soft grass, and in the center, a single slab of black stone. They described it in their journal as unusually smooth and warm to the touch despite cool air temperature. They stayed one night. Only one man returned. His name was Clarence Bell. He walked back barefoot, covered in pine needles, with dried blood beneath his nose and fingernails. When asked where the others were, he said, still listening. Bell was institutionalized 2 weeks later. His doctors believed he suffered from extreme exposure, but he never claimed madness. He claimed knowledge. In his interviews, he said things like, "Time bends near the stepping stone. They do not eat us. They awaken what feeds." And this, it wasn't just Millbrook. It was a copy, a reflection. They've tried this before. Then in 1914, Bell stopped speaking entirely. He scratched one final phrase into his padded cell wall using a spoon. We were never the first winter. They closed the file. But the stone? It's still there. No markers. No road. Just silence. Waiting. There's a cabin in the woods near where Millbrook used to stand. No one built it, at least. Not anyone alive now will admit to it. It doesn't appear on maps. It isn't tagged on satellite images. But hunters know it. Hikers whisper about it. And some say if you find it, you don't find it alone. It looks ordinary enough. A single room, slanted roof, wood so old it's gone gray. No sign of modern life, no electricity, no running water. But inside, the air is warm. Too warm. as if it remembers a fire that hasn't burned in 100 years. On the far wall is a journal, leather-bound, brittle, held in place by rusted iron nails. It's written by a woman named Grace Thornberry. Her handwriting changes over time from sharp and elegant to jagged, frantic, barely legible. But the entries tell the rest of the story. She writes about hiding William, her son, in the root cellar when the others began to hum. She writes about locking the trapdoor and swallowing the key. She writes about waiting 3 days in total silence, with her hands pressed over his ears while the town emptied. She says she prayed not to God, but to anyone else who could hear her. And something did. Not a savior. Not an angel. Something colder. It didn't save me, she wrote, but it noticed. That's all I needed. Grace and William fled into the woods, lived off rainwater, boiled roots, and deer meat for nearly 6 months. She kept them moving, never sleeping in the same place twice, because she believed they were being followed not by people, but by echoes, events that repeated in the corners of her eye. William's laughter when he hadn't spoken, footsteps in snow that hadn't fallen, smells of pine and copper in the middle of summer. She writes, it was like Millbrook hadn't died. It was still playing, over and over, waiting for someone to answer. Grace left the journal behind when she could no longer trust herself. The last entry is written in a hand that barely looks human. He's dreaming now. If he wakes, it begins again. I have to keep him asleep. I have to... The page ends there. Some say William made it out, changed his name, started a family in Ohio. Others believe he's still asleep, still dreaming, and that the listening house, wherever it is now, is listening through him. Stories like this don't survive by accident. Someone always keeps them alive. In the case of Millbrook, it was the undertaker's daughter. Her name was Louisa Kemp, 16 years old when the town disappeared. She never married, never left Kentucky, and never spoke of what she saw not publicly. But in 1899, a box was found in the attic of a long-abandoned farmhouse near Sadieville. Inside were 43 small envelopes, each one sealed, each one labeled with a name. All women, the Everhart sisters, Grace Thornberry, Martha Hale, Louisa herself, even children like Ruth Carmine, age 9, Elizabeth Crane, age 6. The oldest name was Agatha Everhart, listed only as the first to listen. Inside each envelope was a single sheet of paper, no return addresses, no postmarks, just a date, a sketch, and a single sentence written in Louisa's hand. Ruth Carmine's note read. She hummed before the pillar opened, like she had heard it long ago. Martha Hale's. She didn't cry when the baby came, only when it smiled. The note for Grace. She kept him quiet, but he heard anyway. Some sketches showed rooms' wooden beds, wide windows, the inside of the listening house. Others showed figures, always in the background, cloaked, tall, watching, never fully visible, like memories hiding behind curtains. But the strangest note was Louisa's own. It wasn't sealed like the others. It was written on a different paper thicker, blackened at the corners like it had passed through fire. It said, I did not go with them, but I heard the call. We all did. The stone hums when we're alone, and we are always alone. No one knows what happened to Louisa. Some say she died quietly in her sleep, her hands curled like she was still writing. Others claim she was seen years later at a train station in Virginia, murmuring to the trees. But what matters is this. She remembered. She didn't run from the story. She archived it in fragments because she knew the pattern would return, that someone someday would need to see it just in time. The envelopes were sent to a university archive in 1903. All but one have since disappeared. Only Louisa's remains. A record not of what happened, but of what waits. If you ask the locals today about Millbrook, most will pretend they've never heard of it. A few older folks might nod slowly, tell you not to dig too deep, then change the subject. But if you go far enough into the hills, there's one man who'll talk. Name's Ellis Merton. Lives in trailer with no wheels, half sunk into clay behind an abandoned quarry. No phone, No internet. Just a rusted stove, a shotgun, and a stack of journals taller than a child. Ellis wasn't alive when Millbrook vanished, but his grandfather was. And his grandfather made him promise something. Don't let the listening house be forgotten. Don't let it call without warning. Ellis claims he's heard the hum 3 times in his life. Says it comes when the frost sets early and the trees lose their leaves all at once, no wind, no warning. Just bare branches, like something brushed past them. The first time was 1967. He was 12. Found a patch of land near the Elkhorn River, where the grass grew in perfect concentric circles. In the center, a bone-handled spoon pointed straight down. The second time was 1984. His wife woke up screaming, said someone was standing in the room, whispering in a voice that didn't echo. She stopped talking 2 weeks later. Not out of fear, but conviction. She said, "Words feed it." She died in her sleep, eyes wide open. The third time was last winter. Ellis walked 5 miles into the woods after a dream he called too loud to sleep through. He found a spot where the earth had shifted just slightly, like something underneath had rolled over. He sat there for hours. Didn't pray, didn't speak, just listened. When he returned home, he wrote 3 sentences in his journal. He keeps the page sealed in plastic. It reads, "It's awake again. It wants a shape, and we are too proud to admit we've given it one." Ellis doesn't want fame. He doesn't want followers. He just wants one person, anyone, to understand that this wasn't a haunting. It was a signal, and we answered. There's a theory among certain fringe researchers, a quiet one, not published in journals, but whisper at conferences and buried in footnotes. They call it echo settlements. Towns, villages, or communities that appear suddenly in records, thrive for a few years, then vanish without a trace. Not from natural disasters, not war, just removed, as if they were rehearsals. Millbrook wasn't the only one. There was Elmsmere, Vermont, gone in 1812. Same year a meteor was reported overhead, but no impact crater was ever found. Port Barlow, Maine, disappeared in 1766. Every journal entry from the town's minister ends mid-sentence on the same day. And then there's Las Estrellas, New Mexico. Founded 1853, disbanded by 1857. Legend says its people didn't disappear. They just stopped being people. In each case, there's a pattern. 1, a rapid population boom. 2, a central figure with unusual influence, often a healer, preacher, or seer. 3, a structure that doesn't appear on any original blueprints. In Millbrook, that was the listening house. The house itself defies explanation. No photographs. No sketches, but witnesses what few remain described it with unnerving consistency. 3 stories high, but no visible stairs. A fireplace that never needed wood. Rooms that changed their size depending on who entered them. And always a humming. Low, subaudible, like something beneath the floorboards breathing slowly. One woman, a historian named Dr. Celeste Myrick, tried to model the house from memory. She used hypnosis sessions and old journal fragments. Her final blueprints made no sense. A front door that led to a hallway that twisted into itself. A dining room larger than the footprint of the house. A spiral staircase with no top step. When she tried to build a scale model, it collapsed on itself. Not from poor design, from refusal. Her hands shook when she explained it. It didn't want to be remembered wrong. It rejected lies. Dr. Myrick disappeared in 2009. Her office at the university was cleared out within a week, but her assistant kept one folder labeled simply Millbrook, Rehearsal 3. Inside was a note written in red pencil. These are not hauntings. They are calibrations. The house didn't haunt the town. The town was built to house it. Every structure leaves a footprint. Even if it's buried, even if it's burned, the land remembers. So in 1997, when a group of amateur cartographers began digitizing old land survey maps from Kentucky's frontier period, they found something strange. A blank spot. Exactly 3 miles wide, shaped like a perfect circle, with no recorded structures, wells, or even trees. It wasn't labeled Millbrook. It wasn't labeled at all. At first, they thought it was a clerical error. But when they overlaid satellite imagery, the anomaly persisted. No wildlife paths. No forest canopy variation. Just a kind of stillness. One member of the group, a former Army topographer named Franklin Reese, drove out to the coordinates. He never made it home. His truck was found idling on a dirt trail, door open, radio on. Inside the cab, his map was folded open to that same blank circle, circled in black ink. Next to it, he had written, "It's not where they died. It's where they were made." Search teams spent 3 days combing the woods. On the 4th day, they found a boot print, just one, sunken several inches into hard earth, like something far heavier than a man had stepped there. Then they found Reese, naked, curled up under the roots of an overturned tree, breathing, eyes wide, hands over his ears. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't move, but he had written something, carved into the tree bark with a jagged rock. It's louder when you stop pretending it's gone. Reese survived, but his mind didn't. Doctors said his EEG showed unusual activity, like he was dreaming while awake, as if he'd been retuned. What no one talks about is what happened to the survey data. When the team tried to upload their digital scans, the files corrupted. Not once, not occasionally, every time. No one could explain it. They stopped trying. But the physical map still exists locked in a filing cabinet in a basement in Frankfort, Kentucky, unscanned, unopened, because everyone who's touched them since has gone quiet. And when someone goes quiet after knowing about Millbrook, it's not silence, it's compliance. You might think these are just stories, old wives' tales wrapped in Appalachian mist. But in 2015, something happened that turned this from folklore into fact, at least for those paying attention. A private geological firm was contracted to run subsurface scans along a proposed pipeline route that cut straight through the Millbrook region. Standard stuff checked for limestone cavities, aquifers, fault lines. What they found was a void, 80 feet below the surface, roughly rectangular, nearly the size of a football field, completely dry. No signs of water flow, natural erosion, or collapse. But here's where it gets strange. When they tried ground-penetrating radar on the site, the machines picked up movement. Not consistent, not animal, just movement, like something breathing very slowly, or shifting in its sleep. They ran the scans 3 times. Each time, the same result. But on the 4th attempt, the system crashed. Hard. Screens blank. Data wiped. One technician passed out. Another vomited and refused to re-enter the field site. The lead engineer, a man named Javier Wilkes, filed a formal report, but it never reached the Department of Energy. Instead, a subcontractor, one not listed on any of the public permits, arrived the next morning. 2 men, no names, no badges, just one phrase repeated to the local crew. The survey ends here. Within 48 hours, the pipeline was quietly rerouted. The void was never mentioned again. But Wilkes couldn't let it go. He took a printed copy of the first radar scan blurry, distorted, and enhanced it using open-source imaging software. Then he posted it anonymously to a fringe geology forum with a cryptic caption. "This isn't a cave. This is a chamber." It went viral briefly. Then the post vanished. His account was deleted, the image scrubbed, but a few users saved it before it disappeared. And here's the terrifying part. When viewed under infrared filter analysis, the scan revealed something else, faint but unmistakable. A structure, angular, symmetrical, 3 stories high, exactly like the listening house, only buried, preserved, waiting. One geologist summed it up in a comment before the thread vanished. It wasn't built and buried. It grew there. Whatever the Everhart sisters opened, it wasn't from above. It was beneath us all along. There's one question that always lingers when you dig deep enough into Millbrook. Why women? Why were nearly all the names recorded those who vanished, those who listened, those who changed female? Historians avoid it. Folklorists shrug it off. But those who spent years in the darker archives know. This pattern isn't unique to Millbrook. There's a myth that stretches across cultures: Sumerian, Celtic, West African, Siberian, of women chosen not because they're weak, but because they hear differently, not metaphorically, literally. Certain frequencies, particularly those in the subharmonic range, below 20 Hz affect the female auditory cortex more intensely. Studies have shown women are more likely to report sensations of dread, nausea, and presence when exposed to these tones. Some call it the fear frequency. But what if it's not fear? What if it's recognition? In 1924, a linguist named Edith Renner traveled through eastern Kentucky, collecting what she called non-Christian hymnals. She expected backwoods gospel. What she found were lullabies low, wordless songs sung by women in isolated communities, passed down without notation. Every melody followed the same strange scale, and every one ended on a sustained note that made her cassette recorder glitch. She called the melodies stone songs. In her journals, Edith wrote, "These aren't meant to soothe children. They're meant to prepare them." The women she interviewed had no formal music training. Most didn't even read. But they all said the same thing. Mama sang it. Her mama did too. One even claimed it wasn't meant to be sung aloud, but remembered, in case the hum ever came back. Edith died in 1937 under strange circumstances. Her body was found in the woods, seated upright against a pine tree, a stone resting on her chest. The autopsy noted no trauma. Just one detail no one could explain. Her inner ears were missing, cleanly removed. Her cassette tapes were stored in a university archive until a flood in the 1960s destroyed half of them. But a few survived, and in 2003, a sound engineer uploaded a digitized version of one of the lullabies. Within 48 hours, the file was removed, his website taken offline, his email disabled. All that's left is a single transcript of file name, Agatha Everhart. The first to listen, maybe the first to one.